Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for coming. So I'm lecturer in big data and quantitative social science, which kind of means a mixture of mathematics and big data put together to answer social science research questions. But more importantly for this, I'm Deputy Director of the Psychometric Centre, which is about a group of about 12 of us at Cambridge University. A bunch of PhD students, a couple of postdocs, me and Professor John Rust. What I'm going to talk about is our Concerto platform. So we've got a new version, which I'm sure you're very excited about. And it should make it easier to use. And then I'll end with doing what you should never do, which is a live demo. And I'll try and make a test in about 10 minutes. Inevitably, there will be bugs, but let's see how we get on. And try not to laugh too much. Okay, so that's our new sort of color scheme and website and logo and things like that. So there's various information on concertoplatform.com. I wanted to do some market research while I'm here. So put your hands up if you've heard of Concerto before coming to this conference. Oh, wow. Okay, I thought our marketing was terrible, but that's better than I expected. So put your hands up if you've ever used Concerto before to create a test. Okay, so that's pretty good. So welcome. I hope you like the new version. So this is the team of people we've got working on it. So the main guy is Przemek, who's based in Poland and is our lead software developer. But I guess the main thing is that there's a small group of us, but we're not a group of 50. We're an academic group. Hoping to create a platform that everyone else can kind of join and get involved in. So it's sort of a group thing rather than just us as Psychometric Centre. Okay, so for those who haven't come across it before, Concerto is a open source platform. Runs online, but you can, it runs on a server, so if you want to put your server on an intranet, then you can do that as well. With Concerto 5, it's now got a downloadable, installable thing, which basically turns your local computer into a server that then talks to itself in order to actually run the test. Critically, and the reason it's called Concerto, in case anyone didn't realize, is Concerto is a sort of a group of instruments all playing together for a common goal. So Concerto in the testing platform is a group of open source elements that we've kind of shoved together in order to produce this platform. So things like the R engine is our main backend, and MySQL database stores all the data and things like that. So Concerto itself is open source, and it's got all these open source elements underneath it. It's aimed at psychometricians, not just software engineers. So as Psychometric Centre, one of the things we sort of got annoyed about is that there wasn't, a real way of teaching someone psychometrics, computer adaptive testing, and then them actually being able to put it into practice without joining one of the big companies. I think that's probably changing in recent years. There's more and more platforms available, but we wanted to put something out there so that students could actually put this stuff into practice and see it working. So I've got a few screenshots of things things people have created with Concerto. So this is sort of the default, how it looks if you create a personality kind of questionnaire. So strongly agree, strongly disagree, things like that. This is the same thing, but Arabic instead. So just to show it, it works the other way around as well. This was created by some guys in PLN, which is, I need to get this right, the Indonesian electricity company. So they've used Concerto for some of their recruitment. And I wanted to show this because you can create menus and things like that as well. So it's not just showing the test, it's the stuff beforehand. Sometimes that can look quite pretty with the backgrounds and things like that. So it's showing it all in HTML. So basically anything you can create in HTML, it's possible to create in Concerto. Here's some feedback that, so Professor Rust, who is director of the Psychometric Centre, has got, I can't remember, the Twilight Zone test, whatever it is. And this is the kind of feedback that he's got at the end of his test. Sometimes the feedback can be a bit more complicated, so we were commissioned by an Indian test prep company to make a version of GMAT so that all of their clients could practice, and this is the kind of feedback that it gives them at the end. And this is just to show, so this is sort of the bottom half of that page. So because it uses R as the back end, again, much like anything that's possible in HTML can be done in Concerto, anything that's possible in R can also be done in Concerto. So this is ggplot graph. It's one of the less impressive ones. If you've seen ggplot graphs before, you know they can be extremely impressive. So if you can create it, because we're just taking advantage of R, all of those packages that are available in R can be used in Concerto to create tests, show feedback, all the rest of it. So you can do some pretty nice things with it. This is ability test, just to show it's not just textual-based things, so you can have pictures and all the rest of it. This is a more complicated test where you're meant to look at the data on the left and the data on the right, and if it's the same or different, one of the two, you tick the box, and it's meant to show that you can look in detail at things. This was created for Irish civil service selection thing. And this test was created by one of our PhD students, where you basically have to find your way around this map. So I don't know if there we go. So you click. Oh, you can't see my mouse, but you click on the Finland, Kosovo, Belgium, whatever, and you have to find your way around the whole of the map without going down a dead end. So not the sort of typical right/wrong answer. Quite a complicated thing, and obviously that's just taking advantage of what's possible in HTML. I created this, which duplicated what a startup company was doing. So this is, you can, it's trying to measure people's emotions, obviously. So you click on the picture that most matches your current emotion. And in this case, then you go to the next page and it says, why do you feel that way? So I clicked on excited, and it says, because I just finished work for the week, and you can put tags and things like that. So it's, it's extremely flexible, right? So that's what I'm trying to get across. You've got total control to decide how something looks. That can be a disadvantage as well, because the more flexibility, then the more opportunities you have for programming it wrong and it not working and things like that. So that's one of the things we're trying to help with on version 5, is to make it a bit easier to get started without going into details early on. And this is something that we're doing with NESA, New South Wales Education Standards Authority, just to show that Concerto has been used in sort of outside universities in relatively medium stakes situations. So they wanted to use adaptive testing for the literacy and numeracy tests that they have for high school age people. Basically, the system they have is, if you want to leave school early, so before the age of 18, then you can do that, but you won't have any qualifications, because in Australia the only qualification happens when you're 18 at the end of high school, when you're going to university. So in that case, you can take this computer adaptive test at any time when you decide to leave school earlier, in order to go to an apprenticeship or something like that. And then this shows your employer that you've got some kind of minimum standard, right? So I can add up and I can do at least some level of numeracy that's to a pretty reasonable standard. So they use Concerto for the computer adaptivity stuff. They use Concerto because it's a sort of a test administration platform. It's got an API that they then link to their back-end platform. So after the student has finished the test, it immediately shows their results on the screen. That result is also sent to the back-end system, so that the next day the student gets an email from the official New South Wales agency that says, congratulations, here is your mark. And that's their sort of official score. And they also used it because they had a test window at the time, and then they changed it so it's basically open to take at any time between February and December. So any time except Australian summer, the students can come along and take the test. Okay, so to show the new Concerto version, so this was version 3. So version 3 had the advantage that it was kind of pointy and clicky, but it had the disadvantage that we had things like go-to statements and things like that. So any programmers among you will wince at the talk of using such terrible things, and it didn't really make anyone happy. So the programmers felt like there was too much pointing and clicking in order to do what they wanted to achieve. And the psychometricians, or the non-programmers, were still feeling like, well, I have to do everything, right? So I have to click, I have to increase I by 1 every time there's a new question asked. I have to do this, I have to do this, I have to do this. So it wasn't really making anyone happy. So with version 4, we switched to totally code. Right, so it made a whole bunch of psychology undergraduates and things like that quite unhappy about it because they now had to program all of this R code in order to produce a test. But it at least made someone happy, which was the programmers, and they could go along and program their test and not worry about the pointing and clicking. So what we did with version 5 is we had this goal of can you create 90% of tests without knowing any programming knowledge? Right, so that was, this is what we've kind of set ourselves, but it's still built on top of this R code that's the same as version 4. Therefore, this remaining 10%, there's always going to be, the people who've got the sort of very specific requirements. We're not going to be able to produce user interfaces for everything. So those people can still code everything at the back end. And indeed, even if you use the sort of the front end interface to build stuff, you can still see what code is behind that if you want to, and you can play around with it. But hopefully, we want to get to a situation where you can create 90% of the things that people normally create without having to know any programming. And the way we thought we would try to achieve that is with this kind of flowchart interface. So that's what sort of really makes version 5 different from the past. So we're trying to sort of abstract on top of the code to a situation where, as a psychometrician, I'm thinking, well, first I want to show them, an information page. Then I want to show them some kind of consent form. Then I want to give them a computer adaptive test in this case. Then I want to be generating feedback, so I want to generate a graph. Then I want to show them some text feedback with the graph built in. And then a page at the end that says, thank you very much for taking the test, and that's it. So really kind of abstracting on top of this code in the sort of level that hopefully one would think if one is actually creating a test, right? Which is I want them to see this, then I want them to see this, then this. We did a couple of other things as well. So it was totally reprogrammed from scratch from version 4 to version 5. So even though the code sort of, if you're creating a test, the code is the same, with minor modifications. But we used, so we got a sort of a proper new software engineer who's worked for a big company before, and he was telling us about the importance of these programming frameworks, which basically means if a new person, a new programmer comes along and wants to change the real sort of back end of Concerto, then they can look at the code and everything is sort of in this place that they expect it to be. So hopefully this should make it easier for companies with coding teams or whatever it is to say, well, we want Concerto to be improved, so one of you have a look at this code and improve it, and it should be easier to do. We also separated all these different layers, so it's another sort of good programming practice. So rather than everything sort of being all mixed up and linked together, we turned it into these layers so that then you've got this database layer. So if the default is MySQL because it's open source and all the rest of it, but if you wanted to use Microsoft SQL, then you could use that as the database layer instead. Or if you wanted to use some MongoDB big data programming database, then you could use that database instead. So all these sort of layers get split out. Similar with R. So even R, there's, Microsoft has got its own version of R, which is meant to be good for big data. So if you wanted to use their version, then you could, sort of play around with the R layer and then have a different R engine actually providing the system. So that's one side. You can use sort of different, you can mix out and in, but also it makes it easier to scale on the cloud. So we heard some people talking about cloud earlier on in this session. So one of the challenges with Concerto is the database is very efficient, but R is incredibly inefficient. So what we want to be able to do is to say, let's create cloud servers that are full of R instances, so this R layer, and let's have 10 of those and only one MySQL database. And then it sort of efficiently uses the servers. Okay. All right. So as I said, so there's three ways. You can currently run it on an Amazon Cloud server. So there's instructions on the website. It takes about 15 minutes to follow the instructions and click all the boxes, and then you're getting your own cloud server that's completely personal to you. We've got, as I say, a self-extracting thing that then installs everything on your local computer. And we're almost finished creating this cloud platform that we really want to provide to people, so that basically Concerto is on this platform. People can go along and say, set me up with a new server, and it sets them up with a server. And, and it also means we can sort of do some different hosting levels. So there'll be some kind of free level, but if you want to have 1,000 people simultaneously using your test, then you can pay some money, and then that is provided to you by the system. So you don't have to worry about the server admin. So that's about a month away, so nearly there. Okay, so just quickly before I create a test. So these are the main nodes that we've got so far. So you've got information page, consent page. So a consent page is basically you need to tick a box before moving to the next page. Form page, which is kind of demographics. So in HTML, it's a form. If statements, so you can see it's sort of branching up and down depending on the result of the if statement. So it's got all that with the flowchart. Then questionnaire, which is basically, strongly disagree, strongly agree, those kinds of Likert statements. Linear test, which is, a test with right, wrong answers, so you're getting a score, but it's just taking you linearly through it. Cat test, which uses 4PL model, and you can set, the parameters, C and D to 0 and 1 if you want to be using 2PL, or set, the other one to whatever in order to just be using the 1PL model. Polytomous cat we have as well. So again, because it's just using R as the back end, David Megis with his cat-R package has already got a polytomous cat function available there. So we created a thing on top of that for Concerto. So if you want to be doing this was used recently in health testing, so where they've got polytomous questions, but we're trying to get as much information on anxiety or physical function as soon as possible. And then some feedback things, so creating graph, showing feedback, which is basically if score is between 0 and 10, then show this feedback. If score is between 90 and 100, then show that feedback. Okay, so let me show a demo with my remaining time. So this is running on the cloud right now. So what I'll do is I'll create a maths test, and I'll talk you through what I'm doing while I'm doing it. Move that away. Okay, so I'll just call it my maths test. It's flowchart type. If you wanted to do a code base, which is like a version 4, then you could switch to that. And here's how we find how quickly the Wi-Fi is. Okay, there we go. Okay, so we've got my maths test. It's got a start, it's got an end. So first thing I'll do is I'll just add an information page. So this will say, title, maths test. I'm doing the British thing, so it's maths, not math. So, thanks for coming to do the maths test. So that's the kind of information provided. And then you've got this node, and you're just connecting that up like that. So with any luck, there's no bugs at this point. So it's got a title, it's got some paragraph stuff, and thanks for doing the maths test, and then that's the end of the test. Okay, so now I shall add a cat node. So again, I'll change the title, maths test. Please answer the question below. If they don't answer, you can pop up an alert that says you missed answering the question. The continue, or the button, so let's have the word continue. And then this is where it's a bit more interesting. So item bank now, so the next step along. If we look at the item bank, so with this latest version of Concerto, in order to help people sort of immediately see what's happening, so instead of giving you blank boxes, it fills in some example stuff, so you have an idea what's going on. And basically this cat bank has got 3 items. Item 1 is what is 10 plus 10. Item 2 is what is 100 plus 100. And then we've got our difficult item, which is 1,000 plus 1,000. Okay, and you can see the parameters here. So b minus 2, so that's the easy item. This one 0, so that's the medium difficulty, and this is the hard item there. As I say, so it uses 4PL, so you've got C and D, which are 0 and 1, which means there's no guessing, there's no inattention. Correct answer, and all the rest of it. Similarly, these are the response options. So you've got 20 and 40 for 10 plus 10, and 200, 400, 2,000, 4,000. Okay. Okay, and you can see it randomizes response options. So, the 10 and 20 might be 2010, or it might be 1020, it's randomized. But you can turn it off if you want. CAT options, so, basically most things that are in CAT are, we've just copied across here. So if you want to, do different ways of choosing items, if you want to have random-esque turn on, different ability estimators, different content balancing, then you can do that. And different stopping rules, which all kind of join together. So I'm going to have an item count stopping rule. So after 2 items, we'll finish the test. And I'll also add a time-based stopping rule. And the time base is per item. So you have 60 seconds per question. Okay. And finally, this is where the data gets stored, but I'll leave that as the default. Okay, so again, connect that up. Press save. There we go. Okay, so as CAT specialists, we know what should happen. What should happen is we start with the medium difficulty item, which is 100 plus 100. If I get that item right, then I should get the hard item. Now I've got 1,000 plus 1,000, and then that's the end of the test. If I do it again, then again it starts with a medium difficulty item. I'll get it wrong, and it should give me 10 plus 10, so that's the easy item. Okay. Finally, I'll show you some feedback. So I'll just do the sort of simplest stuff I can for feedback. Let's say feedback. And then this is the critical bit. So basically I have, the test is finished. Here's your score. And I'll just show them literally the theta and the SCM. Okay, so basically the cat node outputs some data that's theta and SEM, which is the result of the cat test. And if I connect up that data, then I can show that on this feedback here. So it produces a score, and as you see, it says score $theta and score $SEM. So I connect this score into inserts. So those sort of double curly brackets you saw are basically saying if there's an insert then with that name, then take that data and display it there. So with any luck, it should show them the result of the theta and SEM at the end of this test. So I'll get the answers right. And theta is a big number. SEM is obviously pretty big still. There have only been 2 questions, so it hasn't reduced much. Yeah, if I answered wrong, then the theta and SEM would be minus 1.4, and SEM would be the same as well. Okay, so very last thing, and this is one of the powerful things I like about this flowchart method, is basically if you create a test, your test can be added into another test you've created, right? So, in my case, I created this, and I showed you the emotion sort of assessment thing at the beginning where you said, I feel confident or whatever. So I've already created that, and I can now put that test into this test that I've just created here. So it's got this ORI node, and I can just run that at the beginning. Save again. So it should show this ORI thing. So how do I feel? Let's say I feel confident. And then it'd say, why do I feel confident? I don't know, because I love maths. And then, I don't know, hashtag love. Oh, well, whatever. And then it carries on and it does the maths test that we had before. Okay? I'll get that wrong just to show. So theta's a bit lower. So the hope is that, if someone builds a big 5 node, then they can export that and anyone else can import it into their concerto, and then the community are building these like building blocks on top of each other. So if someone creates an MIRT based thing, then someone else can come along and import that into theirs, and then they've got an MIRT test available. So hopefully these sort of things, as I say, build on top of each other and we all benefit from each other's work. That's enough for me. Thank you very much for your attention. It was all so brilliant, you're amazed. Please. Yeah, so the limitations. So I think the limitations are actually, so it's the, it's still not a stage. So I said this 90%, and I don't think we're at that stage yet. So it still needs little bits of programming here and there when you want to do some things. So you saw the theta, it was 1.4 blah, 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 blah. What you can do is you can, put some code in that rounds that theta to 3 decimal places or whatever. So it's still got a bit more coding than I would like. The main other limitation is with R. So basically when it's running in the back end, it runs an R session for every user who's taking a test. So it's like you've got R open on your computer, 100 times in order to have 100 people simultaneously taking the test. So it makes it, we actually got, so Amazon's got some huge RAM servers. So we've had up to 2,000 simultaneous people on a single, big server in Amazon. But as I say, we're building the sort of multi-architecture thing. So the hope is that sort of more servers will be added and deleted as they're needed, which keeps the cost down. Thank you. All right, thanks everyone.